And remember only that we are men and women. After all, man and women are the highest possible titles. All other names belittle us and show that we have, to a certain extent, given up our individuality and consented to wear the collar of authority, that we are followers. Throw away these names. Let us examine these questions not as partisans, but as human beings with hopes and fears in common. This is from the Boston Inquirer. This was written by a man named Alan Pringle, resident of Napanee. He wrote to the Boston Inquirer, a free thought journal published since, I believe, the 1830s onward. And he said, "Mr. Editor, the long wished for opportunity to see and hear Colonel Robert Ingersoll came at last. Last night, April 3rd, we had the supreme pleasure and satisfaction of taking the Colonel by the hand for the first time and listening to his inimitable lecture on Moses in the Opera House in Napanee. Having 2 volumes of his lectures, I was of course well acquainted with his thought, and but I had longed to see the man and take his warm hand and listen to his eloquent tongue. This wish has been granted, and 3 or 4 hours' experience last night will, as long as life lasts, be one of the most pleasant remembrances of my life." And he goes on to further describe some of the talk. So Napanee on April 3rd is known to have been delivered. It's known to have gone on. But again, I don't have any local coverage. I wrote to the Napanee Library and asked them if they had anything. None of the papers from that era that survived, again, covered anything. They didn't have a word about him coming. Very strange. Belleville, April 4th. This is still another unknown lecture. Must be an idiot. What's going on here? He was denied a lecture hall to speak in, but the lecture seems to have gone on elsewhere, and anyway, based on comments from Pringle. I'm going to talk more about Pringle in a little bit. But here again, I wrote to the Belleville Public Library and asked them if they had anything on him. They did some research. They found some things, people answering his thing. Nothing, no coverage of the lecture, no ads for it happening. This is another clipping from the Boston Investigator, from WT, unknown, somebody who just gave their initials, and mentioning that this was written before the lecture was to have happened on March 22nd, 1880, and saying basically that the mayor of Belleville is an intolerant bigot and canceled the lecture, wouldn't let the local theater deliver. But again, I have a subsequent article from Mr. Pringle saying that Ingersoll's lecture did go on. So I'm leaving the hope open that this may have actually occurred. Okay, somebody once asked if he delivered a lecture in Toronto. I know he delivered at least 4. Here's the first one. The Gods was delivered in the Royal Opera House to a very large audience. And it was very well received. The audience, thunderous applause. But again, the very interesting thing was there was hardly any local coverage that I could find in the local Toronto papers, the Globe, the ones you would think of would be there. It was really a very strange thing going on. So here's a quick excerpt from the Gods. Every nation has created a god, and the god has always resembled his creators. He hated and loved those that they hated and loved, and he was invariably found to be on the side of those in power. Each god was intensely patriotic and detested all nations but his own. All these gods demanded praise, flattery, and worship. Most of them were pleased with sacrifice, and the smell of innocent blood has ever been considered a divine perfume. All these gods have insisted on having a vast number of priests, and the priests always insisted on being supported by the people, and the principal business of the priests has been to boast about their god and to insist that he could easily vanquish all the others. Oops, that's the wrong one. April 6th, delivered the mistakes of Moses. Was delivered again in the Royal Opera House. Again, a very large audience. Again, very well received. But again, no coverage. This is a letter to the Boston Investigator. Again, this came out of Ingersol's papers. A letter from Canada, Toronto, April 9th. Messieurs Siever, many thanks for your kind invitation to write often. In case you have no report from Toronto of Colonel Ingersoll's visit and lectures, please take note that Colonel Ingersoll lectured here to very large audiences, and on the 5th and 6th of the month. On both occasions, he was greeted with the warmest applause. The Colonel expressed himself with surprise and well pleased with the extent and intelligence of each of his meetings. The press, with one exception, the Telegram, abstained from noticing his visit, and either by reporting or advertising his interesting lectures. The awkward report of the Telegram was at least highly amusing, and richly displayed the shifts to which Toronto journalism is put in reporting unorthodox matter. It blew hot and cold, sometimes advancing, sometimes retreating, and displayed an eminent degree the Montebankism it charged against Colonel Ingersol. And then there's this. This came from the Dictionary of Canadian Biography, from an article on Ellen Pringle. Pious evangelist lined the streets leading to the Grand Opera House where Ingersoll was to appear, distributing a propagandistic gospel manifesto entitled A Warning Against the Fallacies of Ingersoll. Anti-Ingersoll material. Roman Catholic Archbishop John Joseph Lynch forbade members of his church to attend Free Thought meetings and even enlisted the aid of the Toronto police force in an effort to track down anyone who disobeyed. That's strange.
You listen to my show. You know where to find me.
Ottawa on April 7th. The Gods was delivered, again. Delivered at the Grand Opera House. There was about 150 in the audience. That's a fairly small audience, again, for Ingersoll. Lecture goers were greeted by YMCA members distributing an anti-Ingersoll pamphlet. And this time, there was some coverage. The Ottawa Citizen actually did put some coverage in the paper. This was a first. This is the first time I've ever discovered it in the Canadian papers. And it says we have an ad. We have an ad for the event taking place, and then the coverage on the day after. It said, Colonel Robert Ingersoll delivered his lecture on the Gods at the Grand Opera House last night before an audience of 150 persons. At the entrance to the Opera House were members of the YMCA distributing religious pamphlets containing extracts from the Bible to show that the Word of God was not contrary to truth, morality, and justice. The lecture devoted 2 hours to ridicule of the Christian religion. That was it. But it was something. It showed that, how many people were there, and that the YMCA was there too. And that, as somebody who likes history, I like that there's something, even if it's against him, it's something to have some kind of citations. Rockville. This lecture was actually canceled. The date that it was supposed to have happened may have also been 31st of March or April 9th. The mayor would not allow this lecture to happen. I don't know what he did on April 8th. I have a hole in my chronology, but something else makes me sad. But this is, again, a clipping from, this shows, I get, with the internet, between the internet and Ingersoll's papers, which are scattered all over the place, they're not organized in a very good system. But I get things scattered from all. This is from the Seymour, Indiana Times in April 10th of 1880, and it said, Colonel Ingersoll was recently